My name is Marco Plouffe. I come from Montreal, Quebec. I am a 3D artist, or as I prefer, a digital sculptor. And I'm also the business manager, the co-founder, and an art director at Chaos Masons. I've been an artist at heart for my entire life, but I've been a 3D artist for about 12 years and a business owner for 8 years now. I started as an IT technician, and I pretty quickly realized that I wouldn't be happy with my life if I was not pursuing my childhood dream of being a character artist in the video game industry. So I sacrificed a lot, and I joined this one-year program in Montreal where I would learn like pretty much all the basics about being a 3D artist. And after the program, I was lucky enough to actually get a job as a character artist for a few video game studios. And afterwards, my passion actually changed a little bit, and it became more in line with the collectible figure industry. I just really love the fact that within a statue, you can have like so much movement and life. And even if it's an immobile medium, you can just heighten everything. Cedric Seo and I, we founded Chaos Masons in 2014, and 8 years later, we could not be more thrilled about where we are in the industry. All the incredible brands we've been able to work on with the great teams that created those brands. So it was a lot of energy, it was a lot of time spent, but we are really happy about how we've been able to create this very successful AAA character outsourcing studio. Well, I'm currently working for a few pretty cool projects, which I cannot talk about. But in the past, I've been able to work on some pretty cool brands like The Witcher, Horizon Forbidden West, Baldur's Gate, Deus Ex, Mass Effect, Apex Legends, Overwatch, a few more like this. And also with incredible companies like Sideshow Collectibles, Prime One Studio, and of course, my pride, XM Studios. My working relationship with XM Studio is fantastic. From the very first gig with them, I could see that, like me, they are extremely passionate people about their work. And what makes XM Studio stand out amongst the rest, I find, is because they are not afraid of exploring new designs, ideas, and all that stuff. And at the same time, always offer the same amazing quality at the end. In the past, I had the great honor of working on XM Studios' Shogun Batman, which was a very complex statue, but it was very, very fun to work on this one. And also, I've been able to work on Ultron and the Iron Maiden statue, since I'm a huge fan of Iron Maiden. I've always been passionate about creating my own designs and characters, so I created this world called Neopocalypse where all of these characters are born. And they were born behind the scene, but I've always wanted to bring them forward to the public in a way that I appreciate it as a digital sculptor, and it is as a printed and painted sculpture. So when it came time to choose a partner that could help me to produce them, XM Studios was the first studio that I thought about, because they're really passionate about what they do, and I know that like with them I would be able to bring these characters to life in the most majestic way that they actually deserve. I've always been really interested into taking like folkloric tales or known themes and kind of like shaping them in a more modern way. And this is what I did with my idea of the Four Horsemen. I tried to think how I could modernize the Four Horsemen. And the way that I went by it was to actually think about like if they were androids, that like they are our creation, right? And we kind of like mistreated them enough so that they would actually rebel against us, and also see the error of our ways with nature and with the planet, and actually join forces with the planet in order to eradicate us. And it makes sense for me to actually take the Four Horsemen as a theme, because I really like this mythos, and it felt really easy to just like take the motivation of the actual character of the mythos and kind of like translate them with the four horsemen and why they would actually want to bring the era of the neo-apocalypse. From there, I decided to go more in depth with the story and try to figure out like why would the androids ever uprise against us, and what would be the motivation of the first androids to be like awakened of the situation, and how they could actually change the landscape and bring this new era of the neo-apocalypse world. Then it would be more questions like, well, who would fight back? How would the landscape of the world change? How the world would be divided, and all of the characters that could exist in this world. And especially questions like, well, at this point, how could we ever find peace or balance again in the new era of the new apocalypse? The conceptualization was a lot of daydreaming at first. This is something I do a lot, and when I actually really feel that an idea has potential, this is where I go more into details. But I knew that I wanted to create a group of 4 warriors that have really like distinct characteristic between each other. Once that I actually had this idea, I went into like creating thumbnails so that I can actually see like what their design would be if they're seen from afar, and try to really make sure that like each of them are unique, right? And once I actually saw that this would work, I went into more details. So I started to really like creating like really deep like motivations and backstories for them, and take these elements to really create what their look would be, what kind of like weapons they would use, what kind of armor they would have, what kind of mount they would actually also ride as the 4 horsemen. And also, it was very important that at the end they still feel unified, right? So I really made sure that their like android anatomy feels like it's been created by the same manufacturer. The same for like their armor. Like for me, it was important that they still feel kind of like the same, although they're very different. So it's really a balance in between making them like unique, but also unified between each other. There is so much more that I can do with the Neo Apocalypse IP. There's many groups of characters in this world, like the Archangels, the Elementalists, and each of them really define a portion of the universe, like where things were, where things are going, what's their ideologies, what do they want in this world, how can they change the world, will they change the world? And things are not just like black and white. There's so many gray areas. There's really a balance in there. And I really find that it could be really interesting to really go even like deeper. All of those groups, they're all meshed together, and they really define what the lore of Neo Apocalypse is. Like I told you, the rabbit hole really goes deep. The story of Neo Apocalypse starts in the 21st century after so many technological advancement has been done, one being the creation of the androids. This miraculous invention will actually blur the line in between what is human and what is this new sentient being. But unfortunately, pretty rapidly, they will be treated as like mere tools, and a lot of them will go through like severe abuse. And not every human will actually be like all mean. Some of them will try to help the cause of the androids by kind of like giving them like a heightened consciousness. So they will create a code called the free will code. Some will call it the frenzy virus, depending on your perspective. But this code will be like kind of like a double-edged sword to them, because in one way you kind of like your mind is more free, but on the other side you kind of like see like the state of the world, and you lose your blissful ignorance. So it will kind of like make them see what's the reality of how they're being treated in this world. An insurrection will actually be sparked by 4 free-minded androids who truly see the depth of humankind's parasitic nature and how they treat the world and their creations. They will unite the androids together into fighting against humankind, and this war will bring the world to a very dire situation where the humans will be split into many groups, some of them hiding, some of them trying to fight against total extinction. When the war is over, the androids will have won, and it will become a new era of android domination. The Four Horsemen will be put in a dormant state, and the androids will prosper for a long time, giving them the chance to create this god machine called the hive mind, which will give them like a new purpose and a new meaning to their existence. And it will also give just enough time for humankind to amass their forces for a counterattack. Hence, the Four Horsemen will be reawakened. The inspiration for all of this actually comes from my empathy for inanimate object, kind of like NPCs in video games. Always hated to like disrespect them and everything. So when we started to talk about artificial intelligence, I kind of like realized like, hey, well, maybe at some point we can like hurt their feelings and that sort of stuff. So we have to be careful with that. And I mean, if we know something is that if you mistreat somebody long enough, I mean, they will fight back. So this is where I got my idea. Each horseman have their own backstory that motivates them to spark the revolution. War was a military android tasked into leading troops of fellow androids into battle. But in the landscape of this new technologically advanced world, one where androids end up fighting their own kind on the opposite side in a war of numbers almost, he saw so many of his own kind fall for a purpose that is not even their own. The android, later named War, collapsed inexplicably in the middle of battle after going berserk. War swore revenge on humankind by rendering it defenseless, and armed with the trust and dedication of hordes of androids who finally have a true and common enemy to fight, it'll be very easy for him to neutralize the largest armies of humankind by commanding relentless battles all around the globe. War is the military leader. He's the one that's seen the most conflict, and he's the best suited to guide others. And although he's kind of like brutish and imposing, he's very charismatic to soldiers, and he acts as an invigorating presence. He wields a claymore-type weapon called Ragnarok that can crush pretty much any enemy soldiers or vehicles, and he rides on his undead bear called Bjorn. Pestilence was a pleasure series android, so it doesn't take much imagination to know what could have happened to her. She quickly became a cesspool of disease, being a worker at a place where they're allowed for some pretty devious ways of using their toys, and then later got deactivated due to malfunction. Pestilence's true desire became to inflict the putrid treatment that she suffered back to her creators and their kind by spreading diseases and biochemical warfare. So it became a cruel pleasure that she nurtured constantly, but hardly giving her any fulfillment, which she would respond by digging even deeper in this pursuit and making the general population live in a constant state of sickness. Pestilence is a seductive-looking warrior who uses long-range biochemical attacks to contaminate the battlefields and her enemies. With her flying serpent, Chrysopelia, she can survey entire battlefields and influence the momentum of the troops on the ground by making some areas unbearable to human beings, and also inflict death from above with her bow-type weapon called Fail Not. She also acts as a scout because of her vantage point and also because of her stealth in the air. Famine was in charge of toiling the lands to provide humans their need for subsistence, but in return would receive nothing short of neglect. Ironically, this lack of maintenance would bring this android to eventually have system failures and be reanimated over and over again in the cheapest way possible until his unavoidable total shutdown. Famine wanted to make the unfairness of his state very clear by destroying humankind's crop and other sources of nourishment. This way they would feel what it is to live a life of misery and try to survive without the energy or care that they took for granted. Famine is the reckless of the group, the wild card if you want. He's an expert saboteur because of his knowledge of machinery maintenance, and he's by nature very chaotic and unkept, almost to a point of malfunction actually. But he wears it as a badge or a reminder of how he was treated in the past. So although he's not like a very communicative android, it's his own way of saying, "Look how tall I stand despite your cruelty." And unlike his personality, he wields a balanced double-headed spear called Longinus, and he travels on land and underground with the help of his gigantic larva called Colossal, who helps him to infiltrate strongholds and shelters. Death was a prototype auxiliary android whose existence was spent with his creator, trying to teach him and push the limits of android sentience. But from his perspective, not only was given the gift of life, but the gift of consciousness and feeling as well. And this created a bond between him and his creator, which made it even more cruel when he was ripped away from these codes and stored away, while his creator toyed with an improved version of himself. He was left there, forgotten to rust, with holes in his mind, until one day he was found and brought back to a repair facility where he would meet 3 other androids who suffered their own kind of tortures. Death dedicated his time awakening his kind and unifying them in a conviction that humankind was unworthy to rule and most unworthy to exist. So he took the mantle of ultimate judge. He played an important role in striking fear into the hearts of the surviving human population and bringing them to despair, even after the 4 Horsemen were put in a dormant state to preserve their existence, just in case the androids would need their heroes once again. Death is the sage and thinker of the 4. When he was put in forceful solitude, it gave him plenty of time to ponder about what should be the fate of his creators, and the answer is simple: it's extinction. He doesn't need to lie or manipulate his kind to convince them of his ideas, because his wisdom and his presence suffice. So following the symbol given to him, he wields the Reaper, a scythe-type weapon that he uses for his role of judicator and executioner of humankind, while riding Nightmare, his legendary pale horse. The one thing I'd like to say to the XM collectors is that I've put so many time, so many thoughts, so many energy into this project, and I really, really hope that it resonates with you the same way that like it does with me. And I would love to actually bring you into my world and have your support into expanding the New Apocalypse universe, because there is so much more that can be done, and I'm so proud of my work.